Love that saxophone. I still do. It's one of the things I wish I could do, but I can't. You know, but I can talk pretty good. All right, whatever. Play it a little bit more. I'm not ready to talk. All right, just when you thought things could not get worse under Saddam Hussein Obama, they just got worse. Saddam Hussein Obama has hosted the first Muslim prayer in history at our national cathedral this afternoon. Washington National Cathedral today hosted a Muslim prayer service for the first time, and planners said that they hope that today's service at the historic Christian cathedral will foster more understanding and acceptance between Christians and Muslims around the world. Now, what's interesting to me is that the director of this, planners of this national cathedral, say the prayer service for Muslims developed after the cathedral's liturgical director met South African ambassador Ebrahim Rasool. Listen to the statement that Rasool made today. Rasool said, "This is a dramatic moment in the world and in Muslim-Christian relations." Not in Christian-Muslim relations, but in Muslim-Christian relations, as they have a Muslim prayer service in our historic national cathedral. Can anyone listening to this show tell me when you last read of a mosque having a Christian service or a Jewish service or a Buddhist service or a Hindu service? Perhaps I'm mistaken. Perhaps it's a more tolerant and open religion than I have been led to believe it is. But this is a shocker. And tied in with this news story of National Cathedral to host the first Muslim prayer service, which they did today, by the way, under Saddam Hussein Obama, I want to read for you a very important speech. I'll read you parts of it because it's too long. That was given at the Four Seasons in New York by Geert Wilders, chairman of the Party for Freedom in the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands, as you well know, was about the most liberal country in Europe, the most tolerant. Hookers in the streets, free heroin, you name it. And what it led to now was the takeover of Holland by Muslims. You see, into each breach, some rain must fall. And so here's what he said at the speech. He's a member of the Dutch Parliament, by the way. He says, "Dear friends, thank you very much for inviting me." He says, "I come to America with a mission. All is not well in the old world. There is a tremendous danger looming, and it is very difficult to be optimistic. We might be in the final stages of the Islamization of Europe. This not only is a clear and present danger to the future of Europe itself, it is a threat to America and the sheer survival of the West. First, I will describe the situation on the ground in Europe. Then I will say a few things about Islam." He said, "Europe, you know, is changing. You have probably seen the landmarks, but in all of these cities, sometimes a few blocks away from your tourist destination, there is another world. It is the world of the parallel society created by Muslim mass migration. All throughout Europe, a new reality is rising. Entire Muslim neighborhoods where very few indigenous people reside or are even seen. And if they are, they might regret it. This goes for the police as well. It's the world of headscarves, where women walk around in figureless tents with baby strollers and a group of children. Their husbands, or slaveholders if you prefer, walk 3 steps ahead. With mosques on many street corners, the shops have signs you cannot read. You will be hard-pressed to find any economic activity. These are Muslim ghettos controlled by religious fanatics. These are Muslim neighborhoods, and they are mushrooming in every city across Europe. These are the building blocks for territorial control of increasingly larger proportions of Europe, taking it over street by street, neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city. There are now thousands of mosques throughout Europe, with larger congregations than there are in churches. And in every European city, there are plans to build super mosques that will dwarf every church in the region. Clearly, the signal is we rule. Many European cities are already 1/4 Muslim. Just take Amsterdam, Marseille, and Malmo in Sweden. In many cities, the majority of the under-18 population is Muslim. Paris is now surrounded by a ring of Muslim neighborhoods. Mohammed is the most popular name among boys in many cities. Now listen to this one. In some elementary schools in Amsterdam, the word farm can no longer be mentioned because that would also mean mentioning the pig, and that would be an insult to Muslims. Can't say the word farm. Many state schools in Belgium and Denmark only serve halal food to all pupils. In once tolerant Amsterdam, gays are beaten up almost exclusively by Muslims. Pay attention, gays. In once tolerant Amsterdam, gays are beaten up almost exclusively by Muslims. Non-Muslim women routinely hear the words whore, whore. Satellite dishes are not pointed to local TV stations, but to stations in their country of origin. In France, school teachers are advised to avoid authors deemed offensive to Muslims, including Voltaire and Diderot. The same is increasingly true of Darwin. The history of the Holocaust can no longer be taught because of Muslim sensitivity. In England, Sharia courts are now officially part of the British legal system. Many neighborhoods in France are no-go areas for women without headscarves. Last week, a man almost died after being beaten up by Muslims in Brussels because he was drinking during the Ramadan. Jews, pay attention, liberal Jews in New York especially, who think you know everything. Jews are fleeing France in record numbers, on the run for the worst wave of anti-Semitism since World War II. French is now commonly spoken on the streets of Tel Aviv and Netanyahu, Israel. I could go on forever with stories like this, stories about Islamization. San Diego University recently calculated that a staggering 25% of the population in Europe will be Muslim in 12 years from now. Now, these are just the numbers, and the numbers would not be threatening if the Muslim immigrants had a strong desire to assimilate, but there are few signs of that. The Pew Research Center reported that half of French Muslims see their loyalty to Islam as greater than their loyalty to France. 1/3 of French Muslims do not object to suicide attacks. The British Center for Social Cohesion reported that 1/3 of British Muslim students are in favor of a worldwide caliphate. Muslims demand what they call respect, and this is how we give them respect. We have Muslim official state holidays. The Christian Democratic Attorney General is willing to accept Sharia in the Netherlands if there is a Muslim majority. We have cabinet members with passports from Morocco and Turkey. Muslim demands are supported by unlawful behavior, ranging from petty crimes and random violence, for example, against ambulance workers and bus drivers, to riots. Paris has seen its uprising in the low-income suburbs. I call the perpetrators settlers because this is what they are. They do not come to integrate into our societies. They come to integrate our society into the Dar al-Salam. Therefore, they are settlers. Much of the street violence I mentioned is directed exclusively against non-Muslims, forcing many native people to leave their neighborhoods, their cities, their countries. Moreover, Muslims are now a swing vote not to be ignored. The second, and by the way, I'm reading to you from a speech given by Geert Wilders, a member of the Dutch Parliament in New York City. And this is the day that our national cathedral hosted its first Muslim prayer session, thinking that they were going to get more acceptance by Muslims. What a bunch of fools. What a bunch of fools. Liberal Christians, how foolish can you be? Well, shall I read any further? The second thing he writes, or said, is you need to know the importance of Muhammad the Prophet. His behavior is an example to all Muslims and cannot be criticized. Now, if Muhammad had been a man of peace, let us say like Gandhi and Mother Teresa wrapped in one, there would be no problem. But Muhammad was a warlord, a mass murderer, a pedophile, and had several marriages at the same time. Islamic tradition tells us how he fought in battles, how he had his enemies murdered and even had prisoners of war executed. Muhammad himself slaughtered the Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayza. If it is good for Islam, it is good. If it is bad for Islam, it is bad. Let no one fool you about Islam being a religion, writes Geert Wilders. Sure, it has a God and a hereafter and 72 virgins. But in its essence, he writes, Islam is a political ideology. It is a system that lays down detailed rules for society and the life of every person. Islam wants to dictate every aspect of life. Islam means submission. Islam is not compatible with freedom and democracy because what it strives for is Sharia. If you want to compare Islam to anything, compare it to communism or National Socialism. These are all totalitarian ideologies. Now, you know why Winston Churchill called Islam the most retrograde force in the world and why he compared Mein Kampf to the Quran. The public has wholeheartedly accepted the Palestinian narrative and sees Israel as the aggressor. I have lived in this country and visited dozens of times. I support Israel first because it is the Jewish homeland after 2,000 years of exile, up to and including Auschwitz. Second, because it is a democracy. And third, because Israel is our first line of defense. This tiny country is situated on the fault line of jihad, frustrating Islam's territorial advance. Israel is facing the front lines of jihad like Kashmir, Kosovo, the Philippines, southern Thailand, Darfur, Lebanon, and Aceh in Indonesia. Israel is simply in the way, the same way West Berlin was during the Cold War. The war against Israel, he writes, is not a war against Israel. It is a war against the West. It is jihad. Israel is simply receiving the blows that are meant for all of us. If there would have been no Israel, Islamic imperialism would have found other venues to release its energy and its desire for conquest. Thanks to Israeli parents who send their children to the army and lay awake at night, parents in Europe and America can sleep well and dream, unaware of the dangers looming. Many in Europe argue in favor of abandoning Israel in order to address the grievances of our Muslim minorities. But if Israel were, God forbid, to go down, it would not bring any solace to the West. It would not mean our Muslim minorities would all of a sudden change their behavior and accept our values. On the contrary, the end of Israel would give enormous encouragement to the forces of Islam. They would, and rightly so, see the demise of Israel as proof that the West is weak and doomed. The end of Israel would not mean the end of our problems with Islam, but only the beginning. It would mean the start of the final battle for world domination. If they can get Israel, they can get everything. So-called journalists volunteer to label any and all critics of Islamization as a right-wing extremists or racists. In my country, the Netherlands, 60% of the population now sees the mass immigration of Muslims as the number one policy mistake since World War II. And another 60% see Islam as the biggest threat. Yet there is a greater danger than terrorist attacks. The scenario of America as the last man standing. The lights may go out in Europe faster than you can imagine. And Islamic Europe means a Europe without freedom and democracy, an economic wasteland, an intellectual nightmare, and a loss of military might for America, as its allies will turn into enemies, enemies with atomic bombs. With an Islamic Europe, it would be up to America alone to preserve the heritage of Rome, Athens, and Jerusalem. Dear friends, liberty is the most precious of gifts. My generation never had to fight for this freedom. It was offered to us on a silver platter by people who fought for it with their lives. All throughout Europe, American cemeteries remind us of the young boys who never made it home and whose memory we cherish. My generation does not own this freedom. We are merely its custodians. We can only hand over this hard-won liberty to Europe's children in the same state in which it was offered to us. We cannot strike a deal with mullahs and imams. Future generations would never forgive us. We cannot squander our liberties. We simply do not have the right to do so. We have to take the necessary action now to stop this Islamic stupidity from destroying the free world that we know. Please take the time to read and understand what is written here. Please send it to every free person that you know. It is so very important. That is a speech by Geert Wilders, a member of the Dutch Parliament, given in New York City, in response to today's amazing change in the National Cathedral, where liberal Episcopalian Christians, I would think, hosted the first Muslim prayer service in American history. Have a nice day. I'll be right back.
Join the Savage Nation. Call now. 855-400-SAVAGE. 855-400-7282. Savage.
My Savage Nation is sponsored by SwissAmerica.com, the only company I trust to protect my wealth with gold